Lesson 1-5, adding and subtracting real numbers. So now we're starting to do operations with our real numbers, in this lesson specifically adding and subtracting. So we're finding sums and differences. Those will be the answers to our addition and subtraction problems. All right, there's one way that you can add and subtract, and that's by using a number line. This helps with just understanding the concept when you have negative integers involved, but it's not very practical when you're trying to do quick addition and subtraction. But I'll show you how it works. So when you add 3 plus 5, you want to start at positive 3 on your number line. If you're adding a positive number, you are going to be moving to the right on your number line. If you are adding a negative number, you're going to be moving to the left. So 3 plus 5, I'm starting at 3, and since I'm adding a positive 5, I move 5 to the right. That brings me to 8. Part B, start at 3. Since I'm adding a negative number, I'm going 5 units to the left, and that brings me to negative 2. Part C, start at negative 3, add a positive 5, we go to the right. We're at positive 2. Part D, start at negative 3 right here, and we're adding a negative 5, so you're moving left. You're even more negative, and you're at negative 8. So when you have a negative number and you add more negative, you get an even bigger negative number, okay, which is actually technically a smaller number, but it's more negative. So if I added negative 8 and then I added 4, I'd be at negative 8 on my number line, and I'd go 4 to the right, I would be at negative 4. All right, this is the note-taking sheet that you have for lesson -15. Try to get definitions and examples for the 3 vocab words listed here, as well as your rules for adding integers and subtracting integers. Okay? So here we go. All right, instead of using our number line to add and subtract, we can use absolute value. In review, absolute value of a number is its distance from 0. So if I said, what's the absolute value of 4? Well, 4 is 4 units away from 0. What's the absolute value of negative 4? Well, negative 4 is also 4 units from 0. So absolute value is always positive because we're talking about a distance. We never have negative distance, okay? We use these signs to say absolute value. So when you see these lines around a number, that they're asking you, what's the absolute value of 4? What is the distance from 0? So just to practice, what is the absolute value of negative 7? Negative 7 is 7 units away from 0. Okay, so how do we use it with math? Well, if you're ever adding numbers with the same sign, so these numbers in this example are both positive, you can just add their absolute values. So 3 is 3 away from 0, 4 is 4 away from 0, add them together, I get 7. That might seem redundant because we know 3 plus 4 is 7, but it helps when you do an example when both integers are negative. Sometimes adding 2 negatives trip people up. So if you think of, okay, if I have negative 3, that's 3 away from 0. If I have negative 4, that's 4 away from 0. So my distance is 7, but you want to use the sign that both of your numbers are. So in the first case, both my numbers were positive, my answer was positive. In the second example, both numbers were negative, so my answer should be negative. So one more example. If I was adding negative 6 plus a negative 2, on a number line, I would start at negative 6, and I would go 2 more to the left, be at negative 8. Here's how you do it with absolute value. Negative 6 is 6 away from 0. Negative 2 is 2 away. I add these up, it's 8. Since my sign of both my numbers are negative, it's a negative 8, which is what we got. Okay? So that's if they're the same sign. Well, what if they are different signs? Then you want to subtract their absolute values. The sign for your answer at the very end is going to go based on which number had the greatest absolute value. Let me show you what I mean. So negative 3 plus 4. Okay, find the absolute values, 3, 4, subtract them, I always take the highest one minus the smallest one. It's easier to subtract. 4 minus 3 is 1. And we want to make it positive because the number with the greatest absolute value was a positive number. So negative 3 plus 4 more brings you to positive 1. Let's do another one. Negative 2 plus 6. Okay, so we're adding two numbers and they have different signs. Well, right away I know my answer is going to be positive because the number that's greatest is positive. Okay, so the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. The absolute value of 6 is 6. I subtract them. 6 minus 2 is 4. My answer is a positive 4. We'll do some more. What is this each sum? So we're adding. Negative 12 plus 7. These have different signs. So you want to subtract the number. Ignore the signs. Take the highest minus the smallest. I get 5. And what sign am I going to have? Well, 12 was the number with the greatest distance from 0. So it's going to be a negative 5. Negative 18 plus negative 2. These numbers have the same sign. So you can just add them up. 18 plus 2 is 20. And they have a negative sign. Part C. Negative 4.8 plus 9.5. I see that these integers have different signs, so I'm going to subtract them. I'm going to take 9.5 and subtract 4.8. I get 4.7. And because this number had the greatest absolute value and it's positive, my answer is positive 4.7. And D, same thing, two rational numbers, 3/4 and negative 5/6. They have different signs. So you are going to subtract the absolute values. You might want to decide which one's bigger. 3/4 is 0.75. 5/6 is about 0.83. So 5/6 is bigger than 3/4. So I'm going to take negative 5/6, or I'm going to ignore the negative right now. 5/6 minus 3/4. I can do that on my calculator. I get the fraction 1/12. And because 5/6 was larger and it was negative, my answer is negative. All right, here's a couple more. When you see the same sign, you just add the numbers up and make them the sign that the two numbers had. So these are both negative, negative 24. Negative 11 plus 9, different signs. Subtract the numbers, I get 2. The biggest one with the greatest distance from 0 holds the sign. Same thing, 9 plus negative 11. These two are the same if you notice, just commutative properties switch them. So it doesn't matter. 11 minus 9, I still get 2. The biggest absolute value is still negative. These two have the same sign, so it's going to be 6 plus 2, which is 8, and they're both negative, so my answer is negative. All right. In math, we have something called opposites. We've talked about this before. Negative 3's opposite is 3. Okay, so they each have a positive and a negative, and it's how far they are away from 0. We can use opposites to subtract. When you subtract real numbers, you want to add its opposite. For example, whenever you see a subtraction sign, you want to change that to add, and you want to switch the sign of the second number. So you're adding the opposite. The opposite of 5 is negative 5. So my new problem is 3 plus a negative 5. We know how to add integers now. They have a different sign. I'm going to subtract 5 minus 3. I get 2. And it's negative because negative 5 has the greatest absolute value. So we are adding the opposite. Let's do a couple more examples of subtraction. 8 minus a negative 1. I see a subtraction problem, so I'm going to add the opposite. The opposite of negative 1 is positive 1. So when you see two negative signs, they both become plus. 8 plus 1 is 9. How about negative 3 minus 4? Add the opposite. I get negative 7. All right, this problem here is just showing you how to add multiple numbers. They prove how they solved this problem based on properties, but they made all the subtraction signs into addition signs. They added the opposites. They got all positive and negative numbers together, grouped them like so, and found their final answer. This brings us to our lesson check. Please complete 1 through 6 along with your completed notes and bring them to class.